Hello everyone, welcome to buildqueue. This is going to be part 1 in a multi-part series about building Unity projects with Jenkins. So let's go ahead and get started. So over the past few years, I've put together a lot of different build pipelines for a lot of different platforms, and it seems like each platform has their own set of issues. So we're going to be working through a lot of those. So whether you're here because you're having issues with one of your build pipelines or multiple ones and you're just trying to fix them, or if you are just starting off and you just need some general direction, don't worry. There should be stuff in here for everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. What are the overall expectations for this course? The very first thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting up our environment. There are a few optional things I'm going to do first before I actually install any software, but in the end, what we want is we want Jenkins to be up and running, and we need to make sure that we have our Unity versions installed. So that's going to be the first thing that we're going to be taking care of. After we're done setting up the environment, the next thing that we're going to be focusing on, we're going to be creating a test project. The main focus of this test project is not necessarily on game development. So to speed things along a little bit, we're going to be downloading some assets from the asset store. After we download and import those assets and integrate them into our project, the next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be working on our build tools that Jenkins is going to be using. These are going to be in the form of editor scripts, and they're going to build for a lot of different platforms. After we have our project in a state where we're happy with it, we're going to be preserving everything. So we are going to be getting set up on GitLab, and we're going to be pushing to our GitLab repository. A lot of people also like to use GitHub, so if you're following along with this and you feel like something is not necessarily working, please let me know. I could probably put in a little excerpt in the description for our GitHub users. So let's talk platform now. I believe that the easiest one that we're going to be going over is going to be Windows. So we're going to be starting there. We're going to be exhausting it all the way to the very end. We're going to be finishing up the build pipeline with Windows before we move on to the next. So we're going to be doing Windows, we're going to be doing Android, we're going to be building the APK and the AAB for whenever you're publishing to Google Play. iOS, we're going to be setting it up from scratch. We're going to have to install another agent on a Mac device, so if you don't have a Mac device, you'll probably need to skip the iOS one. You can still build the Xcode project, but you can't build your IPA for publishing to the App Store. And then we're going to wrap up with roughly another easy one, WebGL. The finish line of this is completely optional. If you just want to store all of your artifacts on Jenkins and just get them that way, that's perfectly fine. You can do that. If you want to continue on and learn something else that's rather interesting and easy to use, I'm going to be exporting all of these build artifacts to an artifact repository, mostly just using Nexus. It's free. Well, there's a free version of it that has more than enough features to be very, very useful. Again, if you want to follow along for that part, feel free. If it's something that you'd rather skip, that's perfectly fine. I know that there's a lot of different ways to store your artifacts, but with this one, we're going with Nexus. Okay, and this brings us over to the software that we need to install. I know that I just mentioned Nexus, but don't worry about Nexus all too much right now. We will cover that whenever we get close to the end of a build pipeline. That's when we'll get set up on Nexus. So the main software that we're going to need to install is going to be Jenkins and Unity. That's the whole reason why you guys are here. Each of these has their own dependencies. For Jenkins, your dependency is going to be Java 17 or 21. May as well use 21, and this is the recommendation for September 2024. Always check the Jenkins page, see what the recommended Java version is for your current installation, or if you're going to be upgrading, make sure that you have the correct Java version. The Unity editor is going to be installed through Unity Hub. After an update that they came out with last year, you have to do it through Unity Hub, and also our licensing and everything is going to be controlled through Unity Hub. And you can use any license for this. You can use personal, you can use pro, or you can use enterprise. After we've installed Unity and Jenkins, the next thing that we're going to be focusing on is we're going to be installing Git. Jenkins is going to need Git for cloning our repository and checking out our repository. Now, before we install the software that we listed on the last page, there are a few optional things that I like to go over, and this is a disclaimer. Don't do anything that your IT department doesn't want you to do if you're doing this for work. They probably wouldn't necessarily want you configuring a lot of these kind of things, so please, if you are doing this for a work environment, environment, please check and verify with them or get their input before continuing on with this. If this part isn't for you, just skip ahead a little bit. I'll put a timestamp down. So the first thing here, I'm going to be setting a static IP address for myself. And the reason why I'm setting a static IP address for myself is because my Jenkins is going to be running on my home network on a separate PC from my workstation. And I don't necessarily want to keep track of a lot of different IP addresses every time my computer that's running Jenkins goes off and then comes back online, especially since we have power outages here rather frequently. So tracking all that kind of information down can be a little bit annoying. Setting a static IP will not completely ensure that it will have the IP address that I specify, but it'll virtually always be that IP that I set. So it's going to be very useful, so I don't have to keep track of a lot. If you're going to be installing Jenkins and Unity Hub and the Unity editors on the same PC that you use as your workstation, then you don't have to necessarily worry about this. You can simply use localhost and whichever port you specify the Jenkins service to run on. After I'm done setting up a static IP address, the next thing I'm going to be doing, again, can't stress this enough, please check with IT because this is something that they most likely would like to keep control of, and they'll probably automate with things like Puppet and other configuration management tools. I'm going to be modifying my host file. So what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to basically set a URL and map it to an IP address. I'm going to map it to an IP address that is on my local network. Instead, I'm going to put in a URL of buildqueue.jenkins.com instead of my IP address. It'll just make it visually a lot more pleasing so I don't have to memorize an IP address, and I'll still be able to reach my Jenkins service. Okay, so the slides are over. The first thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be setting a static IP on my server, and then I'm going to be modifying the host file on my personal PC. And again, if this doesn't apply to you, just don't worry about it. Just skip ahead to the timestamp that I put in the description. Okay, so first things first, let's go ahead and set our static IP. So I have connected to my other PC that's going to be running the service. I'm connected using remote desktop right now. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to go to the lower left hand corner to search, and depending on whether you are using a wire connection or you are connected to Wi-Fi, you're going to either look up Ethernet settings or you're going to look up Wi-Fi settings. I'm using Ethernet, so I'm going to select Ethernet. Whenever you select one of these, you will be brought up to a page that looks a lot like this. You're going to be looking for IP assignment section, and whenever you find it, you'll select edit. I already configured mine, but you're going to want to fill out these fields here with the correct information. So you're going to make sure to turn on IPv4. You are going to select your IP address. You're going to grab your subnet mask, gateway, preferred DNS. You're going to set DNS over HTTPS to off, alternate DNS, and DNS over HTTPS here is going to be off. And you don't have to worry about IPv6. So where do you find a lot of this information? You are going to open up a command prompt. After you've opened up a command prompt, you're going to type in ipconfig and you're going to find the network adapter that is directly responsible for your internet connection. The one that I'm using is Ethernet adapter Ethernet 4, and the relevant fields for me, I need to get the IPv4 address, and I'm going to be setting that. I personally set mine to 200, and the goal of this is you want to make sure that you are using a host ID that is not in use by any other device that's on your network. So I just chose 200 for mine. The subnet mask you will get from right below the IPv4 address. So you'll put that information in there. Your gateway will come from your default gateway. You will find the address in there, and you can copy the settings that I have for preferred DNS and alternate DNS. We are using 1.1.1.1, and for alternate DNS, we are using 8.8.8.8. If everything is set up correctly, you will click save. Now, after a moment, everything should be set. Your static IP should be live. And if you're connected using remote desktop, you may have disconnected. So you may have to redirect to your new IP that you set with remote desktop. The next thing that we're going to be setting up is we're going to be modifying our host file. So you're going to want to go to your workstation. You're going to want to open up File Browser or File Explorer. And it's a very specific path that you have to follow here. So you're going to go to your C drive, to the very root of it. You're going to go to Windows. You're going to go to System 32. And then you're going to find drivers. And then you're going to find etc. And then then we have a host file that's in here. So you're going to right click this, you're going to edit it in Notepad or Notepad++ or whatever text editor that you have. And I already set mine up. It's right here at the very bottom. This is what I set my static IP address to for my Jenkins installation or the Jenkins server. So what you're going to do is you're going to type in the IP address followed by whichever URL it is that you want to use for it. In my case, I put buildqueue.jenkins.com. You're going to save. After you save your host file, you can close it and done. And just as a disclaimer, if you're going to be using this host file to redirect to your Jenkins service is going to have to be running on port 80. The host file can only connect to services that run on port 80. So the optional stuff is out of the way. The next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be installing the mandatory software that we need. So the very first thing that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be navigating to Jenkins, select download and deploy, and that brings us over here to the downloading Jenkins page. So before we download any one of these versions here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to click here on hardware and software requirements. We are going to be looking for Java requirements, and this page right here is rather important. You need to make sure that you have the right version of Java installed. As I said, this is September of 2024. The supported Java versions here listed are Java 17 and Java 21. So we're going to be downloading Java 21. So from here, we're going to open up a new tab. We're going to type in Java 21 download. We're going to go to the first thing here, oracle.com. We're going to go to JDK21. We're going to select Windows, and then we are going to select the installer. May as well use the installer for this. After it is done, you want to run it, select next. Make sure that you remember where you installed this because you're going to have to reference it whenever you are installing Jenkins. So this one is going to C, Program Files, Java, JDK21. Okay, and then it's successfully installed. You can go ahead and close this, and then we'll move back on over to Jenkins. Back on the Jenkins web page, we're going to be selecting back twice so we can get back to the downloading Jenkins page. Now we have a lot of different options here that we can choose from. Normally my go-to with Jenkins would be to install it using Docker. However, I'm going to be using Windows this time. The reason that I'm going to be using Windows is I feel like I have a lot more control over the environment just because Unity editors are so large, and typically I'm working on a lot of different projects, and each of these projects have different Unity editor versions. So I need to install a lot of different ones, and it's a lot easier whenever you use Windows. If you do decide to use Docker instead of Windows, one recommendation that I do have is just make sure that you keep your data persistent. You want to mount a drive typically on your Jenkins server that you're going to be hosting. And within this drive, make sure that you have all of your configuration files for Jenkins, and make sure that you have your Unity installations there too. I don't recommend making a huge Docker container with all your Unity versions. It's going to be rather slow to pull if you ever need to update anything. So with that said, I'm going to be selecting Windows, and that's going to trigger a download. You're going to make sure that you download this. It'll take a little bit of time. Okay, after it's done downloading, make sure you run it. So from here, you're going to click next. From here, you're going to click next again. If you want to change your installation path, feel free. So this page right here is actually going to be very important. If you're able to go ahead and log in as your Jenkins user or whichever user it is that you're going to be running your service on, then go ahead and fill this information here for run service as a local or domain user. If for some reason you test your credentials and it does not work, go ahead and run it as local system, and we're going to be modifying some settings to where we can change it to a local user. The reason why I'm going to be going with local system for now is because for some reason I cannot use my credentials to sign in. No matter how much I tested credentials, it's giving me issues, but there is a workaround for this. And you may be wondering, why isn't that we don't want to stay as the local system user? Well, the reason that we don't want to stay the local system user is because if you're using Unity Personal, Jenkins is not going to be able to detect your license. If you're using Unity Pro or Unity Enterprise, since a license file is built out, the local system Jenkins service is going to be able to pick up on that license. And since that license isn't generated whenever we're using Unity Personal, we have to make sure that we're logged in as a local or domain user. So for now, let's go ahead and select the first one, and let's go ahead and select next. We will change this right after we're done installing. So port number, mine is defaulting to port 80. just because I've already messed with this before on this server. So it's going to default to 8080, but if you want the host file that we configured earlier to work properly, we're going to need to be running this on port 80. So if you didn't follow along earlier, whenever we were configuring our static IP and our host address, you can just leave this at 8080. That's perfectly fine. But if you did follow along, please change this to 80, and always make sure to test the port, make sure that it's available. So select next. Now we are going to be selecting our Java version. We'll select Java, JDK21, select OK, and then select next. From here, you want to select next, and then we're finally ready to install. So this will take a little bit. Go ahead and select install, select yes to any prompts that come up. So everything should be set up at this point. So you can go ahead and select finish. At this point, our service should be running in the background. So if we want to check and make sure that everything is running properly so far, we can just go to localhost and the service is running. We've reached this page. If you left the port as 8080, then you need to make sure that you put localhost 8080 in the address bar here. And as I said before, we don't necessarily want to stick to using this local user. So come to the bottom, type in services, and then you're going to want to find the Jenkins service. You're going to right click it, select properties, and you're going to go to the logon section. You're going to select this account. You're going to put in your username, and for some reason you may have to use // before you start putting in your username. After you put your username in, you need to specify your password. After you specified your password, the next thing you're going to be doing is you're going to hit apply. This pop-up is going to come up. It's going to say the new logon name will not take effect until you stop and restart the service. So let's do just that. We are going to select general. We are going to select stop, and then we're going to select start. And now Jenkins should be running under the correct username. The next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be unlocking Jenkins. So it has the instructions right here. We just need to navigate to this directory, and then we need to put in the initial password. So go ahead and copy this, open up a file explorer, paste this in, open it up with Notepad, copy the password, paste the password in. Jenkins is unlocked. Okay, so we're going to select install suggested plugins. Selecting this will install a few plugins that we will be using, so may as well. After your plugins are all installed, the next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating our first admin user. So go ahead and fill this information in with whatever you like. After you've input your information, go ahead and select save and continue. For the instance configuration, this will be more important later on whenever we set up an agent for a Mac device. So just to go ahead and get a setup for that, instead of using a localhost here, let's go ahead and change this to the static IP, or whichever IP your service is going to be running on. Or if you're running this on the cloud, then use whatever domain, and then select save and finish, and then Jenkins is ready. So that's about half the battle. We went ahead and got Jenkins set up to how we want it for now. The next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be installing Unity. So the first thing that we're going to need to install, we're going to need to install Unity Hub. So we're going to open a new tab, going to search Unity download. That'll bring us to the Unity homepage here. Select download, and this is going to automatically start downloading Unity Hub. So let's go ahead and install this. Go ahead and select I agree. If you need to change your installation for Unity Hub, go ahead and configure that here. Otherwise, select install, and it'll probably take a few minutes to install Unity Hub. After everything finishes, go ahead and run Unity Hub. By default, Unity is going to attempt to install the latest LTS version. Go ahead and cancel that because that's not going to allow us to download the necessary modules that we're going to need for this course. Navigate over to installs, go to official releases, install editor. We're going to be using other versions here. This is the latest LTS version, 2022.3.46F1. We're going to install this. We're going to be installing Android build support. We're going to be installing iOS build support, and then WebGL build support. After all of these are checked, you're going to go ahead and select continue. Agree to the terms and conditions, and it's going to take a few minutes for it to install this Unity editor. And while this is installing, if you need to install any other versions, you can download from the Unity archive. You may get some prompts like this. Go ahead and select yes through those. Okay, so before we move on to installing Git, there's one more thing that I would like to go over as it relates to Unity. Unity is basically done. However, we have Android SDKs installed, and a part of the Android SDK is usually they will have a nested Java version within them that they're going to be using. For instance, if you try to update your SDK on there, it's going to need to reference a Java version. This may conflict with a Java home path variable that you may have set, so we may want to take that out for this system. So you're going to want to go to the lower left hand corner. You're going to search for environment variables. It'll open up the system's properties here. You're going to select environment variables, check all the variables, see if you see a Java home. If so, you probably want to get rid of it. I don't see one in here, so that's perfectly fine. After you've removed your Java path variable, the next thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that you are signed into your Unity account with Unity Hub. Jenkins is going to need to be able to find out that you have an active license. So if you haven't created an account, go ahead and create one through the Unity website, and then make sure that you activate your license within Unity Hub. Okay, and the next thing that we can do, we can move on to Git. For Git, what we're going to look up, we're going to be looking up git bash. So make sure that you open up a new tab and then just type in git bash download. We are running Windows. We are going to be doing the 64-bit install. We are going to run this. We're going to select yes, select next. If you want to change where this is going to be installed, go ahead and change that here. If you want to add any additional components, you can install them here. It's probably not needed, but I usually install git bash and git GUI. And since we're using Unity, it may be worth putting in git LFS for large file support, and then just select next. Select next again, select next, let Git decide, that's perfectly fine. The default setting here is okay. Keep selecting next. Just click through all the prompts basically until it starts installing. The default settings for Git are usually fine. And now Git has been installed and it's set up too. So now all the software that we need has been installed. So that there is going to conclude the first part of the series, which is just going over the general overview of the course and going over the installation for all the software that we need. Our next focus is going to be creating our Unity project that we're going to be using. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next part.